Hello everyone, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us go back to our main character. Sometimes fate doesn't knock politely. Sometimes it crashes into the room wearing the wrong dress. Every camera in the Grand Astoria ballroom turned toward Damien Moretti as he stepped beneath a crystal chandelier that glittered like frozen stars. At 6'4", broad-shouldered and impossibly composed, he looked less like a groom and more like the king of a kingdom nobody dared challenge. The black tuxedo couldn't hide the intricate tattoos winding above his collar or disappearing beneath his cuffs, silent reminders that power was never borrowed. It was earned. Across from him stood Sophia Whitmore, flawless in a designer gown that had dominated magazine covers for weeks. Reporters leaned forward. Socialites whispered behind champagne glasses. Politicians smiled too quickly. Everyone believed they were about to witness the engagement that would unite money, influence, and the most respected business families in New York. Nobody noticed the catering assistant balancing an oversized wedding cake near the back entrance. Abigail Carter had already apologized 3 times before the evening officially started. She apologized after bumping into a florist. She apologized after spilling sparkling water onto her own shoes. She even apologized to a marble statue after nearly walking into it while searching for the dessert table. At 28, she had mastered the strange talent of turning ordinary moments into harmless disasters. Her cheeks always turned pink before anyone else could laugh, and somehow that made strangers forgive her almost instantly. Tonight wasn't supposed to be memorable. She was only filling in for a sick coworker because extra shifts meant helping her dad catch up on overdue mortgage payments. She kept reminding herself to stay invisible. Invisible people never ended up on the evening news. Damien accepted the velvet box from his family attorney without taking his eyes off Sophia. Flashbulbs exploded across the ballroom. Somewhere near the orchestra, a violin reached its highest note. The room collectively held its breath. Abigail took one careful step backward to avoid a photographer. Her heel landed on a loose satin ribbon that had slipped beneath one of the serving carts. She felt the floor disappear beneath her. The towering wedding cake tilted. A server gasped. Plates rattled. Time seemed to stretch like warm honey. Abigail reached for the nearest solid object. Unfortunately, the nearest solid object happened to be Damien Moretti. Her hand caught his sleeve. His balance shifted just enough. The small velvet ring box flipped open. A diamond flashed through the air before landing with impossible precision on Abigail's left hand. Silence swallowed the ballroom. Even the orchestra stopped playing. Abigail stared at the ring sparkling against her finger as if it belonged to someone else. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, trying to pull it off. It wouldn't move. Her face burned hotter with every pair of eyes locked onto her. Sophia's perfect smile cracked. Reporters instinctively raised their cameras higher. Security took one cautious step forward. Abigail finally managed to loosen the ring halfway before Damien quietly lifted one hand. Every guard froze. Every photographer hesitated. Without raising his voice, without looking embarrassed, without offering the explanation everyone expected, he spoke only 3 calm words. "Leave it there." Confusion rippled through the ballroom. Sophia blinked as though she had misheard him. Abigail searched his face for irritation, anger, anything that made sense, but found only unreadable stillness behind his steel-blue eyes. Somewhere in the crowd, one guest slowly lowered his champagne glass and slipped a message onto his phone beneath the table. Damien noticed. He gave no sign that he had. Abigail never saw it happen. She was too busy wondering why the most powerful man in New York had just looked at her, as if this impossible mistake had never been an accident at all. The ballroom remained perfectly still for another heartbeat before the sound returned all at once. Camera shutters erupted like summer rain against glass. Reporters rushed closer, each convinced they had just witnessed the biggest society scandal of the year. Abigail finally slipped the ring free with trembling fingers, holding it carefully in both hands as though it might shatter if she breathed too hard. "Sir, I am so sorry," she said quietly, unable to look Damien in the eyes. "This was completely my fault." Before she could hand it back, Damien closed her fingers around the diamond. His expression did not change. "Keep it for now," he said with remarkable calm. Gasps swept across the room. Sophia stared at him. disbelief replacing the polished confidence she had worn all evening. "Damien," she said, forcing a smile that no longer reached her eyes. "Everyone is waiting." He turned toward her politely. "The evening is over." For simple words dissolved weeks of carefully planned headlines. Security opened a path without touching anyone. Damien walked away with measured steps, never once looking behind him. Abigail stood frozen in the center of hundreds of strangers, still holding the ring she never wanted. The following morning, America woke up to chaos. Every news station replayed the same video from a dozen different angles. Social media could not agree whether Abigail had staged the accident or whether fate had interrupted one of New York's most anticipated engagements. Comment sections exploded with theories. Some called her a gold digger. Others insisted the entire event had been an elaborate publicity stunt. Abigail watched the endless headlines from the tiny kitchen of the apartment she shared with her father. She switched off the television after hearing her own name for the 15th time. "I just wanted to deliver dessert," she whispered, dropping her forehead onto the table. Her father placed a mug of coffee beside her and smiled gently. "Then start there. Honest people survive strange days one step at a time." His optimism almost made her laugh. Almost. Across Manhattan, Damien sat inside the top-floor conference room of Moretti Holdings. Lawyers argued. Financial advisors worried about public perception. Family associates demanded immediate damage control. Damien listened without interrupting. Finally, he slid a photograph across the polished table. It showed the ballroom from the previous evening. Every face appeared startled except one. Near the rear exit, a man in a navy suit had been looking down at his phone instead of the engagement. "Find him," Damien said. Nobody asked why. They simply stood and left the room. Later that afternoon, Abigail returned the ring inside its velvet box and asked the front desk receptionist at Moretti Tower to deliver it personally. She practically ran toward the revolving doors, hoping the embarrassing chapter had finally ended. "Miss Carter." She stopped. Damien's assistant approached with perfect posture and an unreadable smile. "Mr. Moretti would appreciate a few minutes of your time." Abigail blinked. "I think there has been another misunderstanding." "No," the assistant replied softly. "Mr. Moretti believes yesterday prevented a much greater one." Confused, Abigail followed her upstairs, unaware that from a parked sedan across the street, someone lowered a pair of binoculars, made one brief phone call, and quietly said, "She accepted the invitation. The plan moves forward." Abigail stepped out of the elevator onto the top floor of Moretti Tower, expecting polished executives and uncomfortable questions, but the hallway was almost silent. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan, where afternoon sunlight reflected across the river like scattered glass. The assistant led her into a spacious office filled with books, framed photographs, and fresh coffee instead of the intimidating luxury she had imagined. Damien stood beside the window with one hand resting inside his pocket. When he turned, his steady gaze settled on her for only a moment before he motioned toward a chair. "You are not in trouble," he said. "Please sit." Abigail remained standing. "With all due respect, I think returning the ring should have been the end of this." She placed the velvet box on his desk. Damien glanced at it, but did not touch it. "It could have been." She folded her arms, trying to hide how nervous she felt. "Then why am I here?" He walked to a large screen mounted on the wall and pressed a button. Security footage from the engagement gala appeared. Abigail watched herself stumble toward the stage exactly as she remembered. Then Damien froze the recording several seconds before the accident. He enlarged a section near the ballroom entrance. A man in a navy suit was not watching the ceremony. Instead, he was watching Damien. "Do you recognize him?" Damien asked. Abigail leaned closer and shook her head. "No." Damien nodded once before closing the video. "Neither do I. That is the problem." She frowned. "I still do not understand what this has to do with me." "Whoever he was," Damien replied. "He left immediately after the ring landed on your hand." Abigail let out a nervous laugh. "Maybe he just hated weddings." Damien almost smiled, the faintest hint of amusement softening his normally unreadable face. "I considered that possibility for approximately 10 seconds. The unexpected answer caught her off guard, and despite everything, she laughed. It escaped before she could stop it. Damien noticed. So did she. The tension eased for a heartbeat before his expression became serious again. Something changed the moment everyone believed you were connected to me. Abigail looked down at the velvet box. You still think this was an accident? I think someone else does not. Silence settled between them, though it felt different now, less awkward and more uncertain. Abigail finally pushed the ring across the desk. I am an ordinary woman. I work extra catering shifts. My apartment has a leaky faucet that my father keeps promising to fix. Nobody has any reason to care who I am. Damien studied her without interruption. That is exactly why I need you to trust me. She blinked. Trust you. For the next few days, I would like the world to continue believing you are wearing that ring. Abigail stared at him as though he had suggested moving to the moon. Absolutely not. Before Damien could answer, his assistant entered carrying a tablet. Her calm expression had disappeared. She quietly handed it to him. Damien read the message, his eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly. He turned the screen toward Abigail. A photograph filled the display. It showed the front entrance of her apartment building taken less than 5 minutes earlier. Parked across the street was the same Navy sedan that had appeared outside Moretti Tower. Abigail slowly looked up from the image, her smile gone. Damien closed the tablet with deliberate care. Now do you understand why I asked you to stay? Because whoever is watching has not stopped watching. Abigail stared through the tinted window of Damien's town car as Manhattan drifted past in a blur of yellow taxis and crowded sidewalks. Nothing outside looked unusual, yet every parked vehicle suddenly seemed suspicious. Every stranger holding a phone appeared to be watching someone. She wrapped her arms around herself and let out a slow breath. I cannot just disappear, she said quietly. My father will think something terrible happened. Damien, seated across from her, handed over a phone. Call him. Tell him you accepted temporary work for a private event. My staff will make certain he is comfortable until this is over. She hesitated before dialing. Her father answered on the second ring with his usual cheerful voice. After hearing her explanation, he laughed softly. You always find the most interesting jobs, Abby. Just remember to eat something besides fancy appetizers. She smiled despite the anxiety pressing against her chest. I will. I love you. Love you too, kiddo. The call ended, leaving a silence that somehow felt less heavy than before. Nearly 40 minutes later, the car passed through elegant iron gates and rolled onto a tree-lined driveway that stretched toward an enormous stone estate overlooking the Hudson River. Abigail's eyes widened. People actually live here? Damien glanced toward the mansion. Some days it feels more like they work here. That unexpected answer earned another small laugh from her. Inside, the house was breathtaking without feeling cold. Sunlight spilled across polished hardwood floors. Fresh flowers filled the entrance hall. Family portraits lined the staircase instead of expensive paintings. Abigail looked around in amazement while trying not to stare. A housekeeper welcomed her warmly before leading her upstairs. Halfway across the landing, Abigail became distracted by an antique grandfather clock. She stepped backward without looking and bumped into a decorative table. A porcelain vase wobbled dangerously. She lunged forward with both hands, caught the vase against her chest, then lost her balance and sat down hard on the thick carpet. The vase survived. Her dignity did not. She squeezed her eyes shut. Please tell me nobody saw that. A quiet chuckle answered from behind her. Damien stood at the end of the hallway, one hand resting lightly against the doorframe. It was not a loud laugh, only brief and genuine, as though he had forgotten how to make the sound until that moment. He walked over and offered his hand. The vase belonged to my grandmother, he said. Abigail's face turned bright red. I am so sorry. It has survived 3 generations of children. I think it can survive you. She accepted his hand and stood, surprised by the warmth in his voice. For the first time since the gala, she looked directly into his eyes without fear. Later that evening, they shared dinner in a quiet breakfast room instead of the formal dining hall. Abigail accidentally picked up the wrong fork, caught herself, and laughed before anyone else could. Even the staff smiled. Damien watched the easy way she made people relax simply by refusing to pretend she was perfect. He had spent years surrounded by polished conversations and carefully rehearsed smiles. Abigail was none of those things. She was real. Meanwhile, 2 floors below, a member of the household staff quietly unlocked a maintenance closet, removed a small disposable phone from behind a shelf, and whispered only one sentence before ending the call. She is staying here tonight. Upstairs, Damien paused in the middle of his conversation, his attention drifting toward the hallway, as if some instinct had quietly warned him that the danger he expected had not been left outside the gates. It had already been welcomed into his own home. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows, filling the breakfast room with a warm glow that made the enormous estate feel almost ordinary. Abigail woke earlier than everyone else, determined to prove she was not completely out of place. After wandering through 3 hallways, opening the wrong pantry twice, and accidentally greeting a life-sized marble statue with a polite "good morning," she finally found the kitchen. One of the cooks smiled kindly and offered to help, but Abigail insisted she could manage a simple pot of hot chocolate. 10 minutes later, a tiny cloud of cocoa powder floated across the counter. One marshmallow had somehow landed inside a fruit bowl, and she was laughing at herself before anyone else had the chance. Damien entered quietly, stopping just inside the doorway as he watched the unexpected scene unfold. "I was attempting to be useful," Abigail admitted with an embarrassed grin while holding a wooden spoon like it was evidence in a courtroom. The kitchen appears to disagree. He looked at the scattered ingredients before reaching for 2 mugs. "The kitchen has survived worse." She raised one eyebrow. "That sounds strangely specific. My cousin once tried to fry a turkey indoors." Abigail burst into genuine laughter, nearly dropping the spoon again. "Please tell me you are joking." "I wish I were." For the next few minutes, they finished preparing breakfast together without anyone giving instructions. Damien measured the ingredients with quiet precision, while Abigail stirred the chocolate carefully this time. The comfortable silence between them no longer felt awkward. It felt natural. As they carried their mugs toward the terrace overlooking the river, Abigail noticed a thin scratch across Damien's knuckles. "Your hand," she said softly. "You should clean that." He glanced at it as though he had forgotten it existed. "It is nothing." She disappeared into the nearby powder room and returned carrying a small first aid kit. "My father always says little cuts become bigger problems when people ignore them." Damien studied her for a brief moment before extending his hand without another word. Abigail cleaned the scratch with careful movements, concentrating so intensely that she never realized how close they were standing. Damien watched the kindness in her expression instead of the bandage she wrapped around his hand. Nobody had treated him with such ordinary concern in years. There were no hidden motives, no negotiations, no expectations, only quiet compassion. A housekeeper passing through the hallway noticed the scene and smiled to herself before continuing without interrupting them. Later that afternoon, Damien invited Abigail to review several upcoming charity events where the public expected to see his fiancée. She looked over the schedule and nearly choked on her coffee. "There are photographers at all of these." "Yes." "Thousands of people." "Probably." She sighed dramatically. "I cannot even walk through a bakery without bumping into the display case." For the first time that day, Damien laughed openly. The sound surprised both of them. Before Abigail could respond, Damien's assistant entered carrying a sealed envelope that had arrived without a return address. Damien opened it carefully. Inside was a single glossy photograph taken only an hour earlier. It showed Abigail gently wrapping the bandage around his hand on the terrace. Across the bottom, 3 words had been printed in neat black letters. "Getting attached already?" Damien's smile disappeared. Abigail slowly looked from the photograph to his face as a cold realization settled over both of them. Someone had been close enough to capture a private moment inside the estate, and that meant the person hiding among them was growing bolder. The anonymous photograph changed everything inside the estate without changing anything anyone could see. Breakfast was still served on polished silver trays. Gardeners still trimmed the hedges with quiet precision. Staff members continued smiling politely as they walked the halls. Yet every familiar face suddenly carried a question that could not be asked aloud. Damien ordered a discreet internal review, but he refused to accuse anyone without proof. Abigail noticed the difference immediately. Conversations became shorter whenever she entered a room. Doors closed more softly. Even the house seemed to be holding its breath. That afternoon, Damien invited her to accompany him to a children's literacy charity hosted at a historic library in downtown Manhattan. "Do I really have to wear these heels?" Abigail asked while staring at the elegant shoes waiting beside her dress. "They look dangerous." Damien glanced down at them before looking back at her. "Wear the flats." She blinked. Everyone else will be dressed perfectly. I asked you to attend, he replied, not to pretend to be someone else. Those words settled warmly in her heart, though she hid the smile that tried to appear. When they arrived, reporters immediately surrounded the entrance, their cameras flashing beneath the afternoon sun. Damien calmly offered his arm. Abigail hesitated for only a second before accepting it. Inside, volunteers welcomed local families while children explored colorful books and reading corners. The event felt refreshingly normal compared to the glamorous gala that had changed both of their lives. Abigail relaxed almost instantly after a little girl shyly asked if she would help read a picture book. Within minutes, she was sitting on a small carpet, using funny voices for each character until several children burst into laughter. One little boy laughed so hard that he accidentally snorted, making Abigail laugh even harder. Across the room, Damien watched quietly from a distance. Business leaders approached him with polite conversation, but his attention kept drifting back toward Abigail. She was completely unaware that half the room had begun watching her instead of the scheduled speakers. She was simply being herself. Sophia Whitmore entered nearly 30 minutes later wearing a flawless cream-colored suit that immediately attracted every nearby camera. She walked directly toward Damien before glancing at Abigail, surrounded by smiling children. Interesting choice, Sophia said with effortless elegance. Your public image has certainly changed. Damien answered evenly. Children usually improve any room. Sophia's smile remained graceful, but her eyes hardened for the briefest moment. You always did enjoy surprising people. Before Damien could reply, the event coordinator hurried onto the stage to announce a special donation ceremony. Guests gathered beneath a decorative arch covered with fresh flowers and suspended storybooks. Abigail stood near the front after the children insisted she join them. As the applause began, a sharp creaking sound echoed overhead. Several guests instinctively looked up. One of the large decorative lighting fixtures hanging above the stage swayed much farther than it should have. Damien reacted before anyone else seemed to understand what was happening. He crossed the distance in seconds, gently pulling Abigail backward just as the fixture slipped from its mount and crashed harmlessly onto the empty section of the stage where she had been standing only a moment earlier. The room fell silent except for the startled gasps of parents gathering their children. Event staff quickly assured everyone that no one had been injured, calling it an unfortunate equipment failure. Abigail looked at the broken fixture, then at Damien, whose hand had never released hers. His expression remained controlled, but his eyes had turned colder than she had ever seen. Across the crowded room, Sophia quietly lowered her phone after deleting a message she had never sent. While hidden among the departing guests, someone smiled with quiet disappointment that the carefully planned accident had failed once again. The drive back to the estate passed in unusual silence. Rain drifted lightly across the windshield while the city lights blurred into long ribbons of gold and white. Abigail kept replaying the moment beneath the lighting fixture, searching for a simple explanation that would make everything feel normal again. Do you really think that was an accident? She finally asked. Damien rested one arm against the door, watching the passing traffic instead of answering immediately. I believed it was possible until today. She swallowed. So someone wanted to frighten us? His eyes shifted toward her. No. Someone expected you to be standing in exactly that spot. The words settled heavily between them. Back at the estate, Damien instructed everyone to enjoy the evening as planned while quietly asking his head of security to review every camera from the charity event. Less than an hour later, 3 large monitors filled his private office with synchronized recordings from different angles. Abigail stood beside him, still wearing the blue dress from the event, her shoes abandoned near the doorway after insisting her feet had surrendered hours ago. Damien's security chief pointed toward one frame. Watch the timeline. The recording showed guests entering the library. Volunteers carried decorations into position. Children arranged books along colorful tables. Everything appeared ordinary until another camera revealed a maintenance worker replacing a light bulb nearly 40 minutes before the ceremony. Abigail frowned. I do not remember seeing him afterward. Neither does the event staff, the security chief replied. Because no maintenance crew was scheduled today. Damien folded his arms. Track his route. Another recording appeared. The worker exited through a side hallway, removed his safety vest, placed it inside a trash container, and disappeared into the crowd wearing an ordinary business jacket. He never approached Damien. He never looked toward the donation stage. Instead, every camera captured the same unsettling detail. His attention remained fixed on Abigail from the moment she entered the building. Damien slowly leaned closer to the screen. Pause. The image froze. Abigail stared at the stranger's face, but felt nothing. No recognition. No memory. Only confusion. "I have never seen him before," she whispered. Damien believed her immediately. He replayed the footage once more before speaking quietly. The engagement did not create the danger. Abigail looked at him. Then what did? He remained silent until another investigator entered carrying a thin folder collected from public records. "We searched every connection between Miss Carter and the Moretti family," the investigator explained. "There are none." Abigail forced a nervous smile. "See? I told you I am completely ordinary." The investigator hesitated. "Except for one thing." He opened the folder and placed an enlarged newspaper clipping on the desk. It was almost a year old. The photograph showed a crowded subway platform after a small commuter train had stopped because of an electrical problem. Several passengers were helping elderly riders reach the street. Abigail pointed to herself near the edge of the picture. "I remember that day. The elevators stopped working, so everyone helped each other with the stairs." Damien looked more closely. Abigail was kneeling beside someone sitting against the wall, offering a bottle of water while shielding the person's face from curious onlookers with her jacket. The newspaper had blurred the stranger's features, but one detail remained visible. The unknown man was clutching a dark leather briefcase. Who was he? Damien asked. Abigail searched her memory. She closed her eyes for several seconds before slowly shaking her head. I cannot remember his face at all. I only remember that he looked terrified, and I stayed until an ambulance arrived." Damien's expression sharpened as pieces began fitting together in ways he did not like. If the stranger had been carrying something worth hiding, then Abigail had unknowingly become the last ordinary person to see him alive and calm. Somewhere else in the city, a locked file was opened, a finger stopped on Abigail's photograph, and a quiet voice said, "She still does not remember him. We are running out of time before she does." Sleep refused to visit Abigail that night. Every time she closed her eyes, the old newspaper photograph returned, followed by the face she could not remember. Before sunrise, she wandered into the mansion library carrying a blanket around her shoulders. The room smelled faintly of cedar wood and old leather. She curled into a window seat with a notebook, hoping that writing down every detail she could remember from the subway incident might unlock something hidden in the corners of her memory. She managed only 3 sentences before Damien quietly entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her without interrupting her thoughts. "You always wake this early?" she asked. "Only when something refuses to make sense," he answered. She smiled weakly. "Then we have something in common." They sat in comfortable silence watching the first rays of sunlight spread across the river. Abigail closed her notebook with a sigh. "I remember the smell of burned wires. I remember helping an elderly woman down the stairs. I remember someone crying because they were late for work. But every time I try to remember the man with the briefcase, it feels like my mind skips over him." Damien considered her words carefully. Memory protects people in strange ways. She looked toward him, or hides something important. Before either of them could continue, Damien's security chief entered carrying another folder. "We identified the man from the newspaper," he said. Abigail's heartbeat quickened. The folder opened to reveal an official photograph. The face was older than she expected, with kind eyes and a tired smile. Beneath the picture was a single name, Daniel Mercer. The security chief continued carefully. Daniel Mercer worked as a forensic accountant for a federal task force investigating financial crimes. According to public records, he disappeared 2 days after that subway incident and was officially declared missing several months later. Abigail stared at the photograph until a sharp ache formed behind her eyes. Suddenly, a tiny fragment of memory slipped into place. Daniel had been shivering despite the summer heat. His hand had been gripping the leather briefcase so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Before the paramedics arrived, he had looked directly at her and whispered one sentence. "If anyone asks, tell them you never saw me." Abigail covered her mouth in shock. "I remember." Damien immediately leaned forward. "What else?" She squeezed her eyes shut, searching for more, but the memory faded as quickly as it had appeared. That is all. I swear it is all. Damien believed her. The security chief exchanged a worried glance with him before quietly leaving the room. Damien walked toward the window, his jaw tightening as pieces finally aligned. "This was never about me," he said softly. "You crossed paths with a man carrying information powerful enough to frighten people even after all this time." Abigail stood beside him, her hands trembling around the coffee mug. "But I do not know anything." "They do not know that." At that exact moment, Damien's private phone vibrated. The message contained only one photograph. It showed Abigail's father walking out of his neighborhood grocery store carrying 2 paper bags with a calm expression, completely unaware that someone had taken the picture from across the street only minutes earlier. Beneath the image appeared a single sentence: "If her memory returns, the next conversation will not be with you." Damien did not waste a single minute after receiving the photograph of Abigail's father. Within the hour, trusted members of his security team quietly repositioned themselves around the neighborhood without attracting attention. They greeted neighbors politely, blended into morning traffic, and never allowed anyone to notice they were watching. Abigail stood beside the office window with folded arms, struggling to steady her breathing. "I never wanted anyone else dragged into this," she whispered. Damien stepped beside her, leaving enough space that she never felt cornered. "Neither did I." She looked up at him. "You keep saying this is not my fault." "Because it is not." "Then why does it feel like every good person around me is paying the price?" Damien did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket and carefully placed the engagement ring on the desk between them. The diamond reflected the afternoon sunlight. "Because decent people often blame themselves for storms they did not create." Abigail stared at the ring. "You still expect me to wear it?" "Only if you choose to." She searched his face for pressure, but found none. That surprised her more than anything else. Slowly, she picked up the ring and slipped it back onto her finger. This time it fit perfectly. "I am not doing this because I enjoy pretending," she said. "I know. I am doing it because I trust you." Something softened behind Damien's steady eyes. It disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived, but Abigail noticed it anyway. Later that evening, the estate hosted a small fundraising dinner for local youth programs, an event that had been scheduled months before the gala. Publicly canceling would invite more questions, so Damien insisted everything continue as planned. Abigail entered wearing a simple navy dress instead of an expensive designer gown. She still felt out of place among senators, judges, and business leaders, but she refused to hide behind Damien all night. While guests gathered on the terrace, an elderly volunteer accidentally dropped a stack of donation cards across the marble floor. Before anyone else reacted, Abigail knelt down to help collect them. Within seconds, several children joined her, turning the small accident into an unexpected game. Laughter spread across the terrace. Even distinguished guests found themselves smiling. Damien watched from several feet away, realizing once again that Abigail possessed a gift money could never purchase. She made strangers feel comfortable simply by treating everyone as equals. As the evening settled into relaxed conversation, Abigail wandered onto a quiet balcony overlooking the gardens to catch her breath. Damien followed a minute later carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. "I thought you might need a break," he said. She accepted one gratefully. "Thank you." They stood together listening to crickets and distant music drifting from inside the house. "You know," Abigail said with a shy smile, "before all this happened, I thought powerful people never got nervous." Damien almost laughed. "The wise ones do." She looked at him, and for the first time neither of them looked away. The silence between them no longer felt uncertain. It felt honest. Abigail reached up without thinking and straightened the slightly crooked edge of his tie. When she realized what she had done, her cheeks immediately turned pink. "Sorry, it was bothering me." Damien's voice became unusually gentle. "It was bothering me too." Their eyes met again, closer than ever before, until the sound of a camera shutter echoed faintly somewhere below the balcony. They stepped apart at the same moment. Damien moved to the railing and scanned the dark gardens, but whoever had been there was already gone. When they returned inside several minutes later, the ballroom remained full of smiling guests, untouched desserts, and cheerful conversation. Only one thing had changed. The engagement ring was no longer on Abigail's hand. Resting in its place was a neatly folded white card with 6 handwritten words. She finally trusts you. Our turn now. The ballroom transformed within seconds. Damien quietly closed his hand around the folded card while his eyes searched every reflection in the polished windows, every smiling guest, every waiter carrying silver trays. Nothing appeared unusual, and that unsettled him more than open danger ever could. Abigail instinctively checked her hand again, hoping she had somehow overlooked the ring, but only the faint impression where it had rested remained. I did not even feel someone take it, she whispered. Damien slipped the note into his jacket. That was the point. He signaled discreetly to his security chief without alarming the guests. No dramatic announcements followed. No doors slammed shut. Music continued playing as if the evening had never changed. Damien understood something important. Whoever was orchestrating this wanted fear, not chaos. 15 minutes later, after the final guests departed, every member of the household gathered in the main sitting room. Damien thanked each employee personally for their work before calmly explaining that an item had disappeared during the event. He watched every face instead of listening to every answer. Some appeared confused. Others looked offended. One gardener even offered to help search the grounds before sunrise. Abigail stood quietly beside the fireplace, realizing these people were not merely employees. Many had worked for the Moretti family longer than Damien himself. Accusing any of them without proof would destroy years of loyalty. After everyone left, Damien turned toward his security chief. What did you see? The older man answered carefully. Everyone reacted naturally except one person. He placed a printed photograph onto the coffee table. It showed Victor Hale, Damien's longtime head of logistics, walking through the east hallway moments before Abigail discovered the ring was missing. Victor has worked for my family for 18 years, Damien said. He also left his phone in the kitchen for 23 minutes tonight. The security chief nodded. Enough time for someone else to use it. Damien looked thoughtful instead of convinced. Exactly. Abigail stepped closer. You think someone wants us to blame the wrong person? Damien met her eyes with quiet approval. That is the first conclusion I reached. Her observation shifted the entire investigation. Instead of focusing on who looked guilty, Damien began asking who benefited from creating suspicion inside his own household. Hours later, Abigail wandered into the estate kitchen, unable to sleep. She decided baking cookies felt easier than worrying. 20 minutes afterward, flour dust covered the counter. One measuring cup had disappeared completely, and the first batch emerged from the oven looking more like oddly shaped biscuits than chocolate chip cookies. Damien entered after following the unmistakable smell of warm butter. He looked at the tray before lifting one misshapen cookie. Is it supposed to look like this? Abigail laughed so hard she nearly dropped the mixing bowl. Absolutely not. He took one careful bite anyway. After chewing thoughtfully, he reached for another. They taste better than they look. She smiled. That might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said about my baking. For a brief moment the mansion felt peaceful again. Then Damien's phone vibrated. An encrypted message had arrived from one of his investigators. Attached was newly recovered security footage from outside the charity library. The video showed the fake maintenance worker climbing into a waiting sedan after leaving the building. The driver turned toward him just before the car pulled away. Damien froze the frame. Abigail stepped beside him and stared at the screen. The driver's face was perfectly clear. It was not a stranger. It was Sophia Whitmore. Abigail stared at the frozen image until she forgot to breathe. Sophia Whitmore sat behind the steering wheel with both hands resting calmly on it, her face illuminated by the streetlights outside the library. Nothing about her expression looked frightened or rushed. She looked like someone carrying out a carefully planned appointment. That cannot be a coincidence, Abigail whispered. Damien remained silent for several seconds, studying every frame instead of jumping to conclusions. No, he finally replied. But it is not the whole story either. Abigail looked at him in surprise. After everything that has happened, you still are not certain? Damien enlarged the image again. Sophia is intelligent. If she wanted to disappear, she would never allow herself to be recorded this clearly. Abigail frowned. Then why would she be there? Because someone wanted us to find her. Early the next morning, Damien requested a private meeting with Sophia at a quiet botanical conservatory before it opened to the public. The glass ceilings filled the space with soft morning light, while fountains echoed gently through the gardens. Abigail remained in another section of the conservatory with Damien's assistant, respecting his request to let him speak alone. Sophia arrived exactly on time, wearing a simple beige coat instead of her usual designer wardrobe. She looked exhausted. Damien placed the printed photograph on a nearby bench without saying a word. Sophia glanced at it once and quietly closed her eyes. I wondered how long it would take, she admitted. Damien did not raise his voice. Explain. She looked toward the rows of orchids before answering. 6 months ago, my father accepted financial help from someone I trusted. Later, I discovered those favors came with conditions. Damien listened without interrupting. The man who offered that help wanted our engagement because it would give him influence over your family's companies after the wedding. Who? Damien asked. Sophia hesitated. I never saw him directly. Every instruction came through different people. They always reminded me that my family's future depended on cooperation. Damien studied her face carefully. He had negotiated with enough powerful people to recognize genuine fear hidden beneath practiced confidence. Why were you driving that car? Sophia reached into her purse and removed a small envelope. Because they told me to pick someone up after the charity event. I never met him before. I thought I was delivering a message. I did not know anyone was trying to frighten Abigail. Damien accepted the envelope. Inside rested Abigail's missing engagement ring. Sophia's voice became almost a whisper. They made me return it today. They said you would understand who was really making the decisions. Abigail watched from across the conservatory, unable to hear the conversation, but she noticed something unexpected. Sophia was crying quietly, while Damien remained completely still, neither accusing nor comforting her. When they returned to the estate, Damien placed the recovered ring on his desk beside the envelope. Folded inside was one final sheet of paper containing a single sentence written in elegant handwriting. He recognized the handwriting immediately because he had seen it throughout his childhood on birthday cards, business advice, and family letters. Abigail noticed the color drain from his face. Damien, she asked gently, what is it? He handed her the note without speaking. At the bottom, beneath the message, was a signature that changed everything. Vincent Moretti, the man who had raised Damien after his parents died. The man Damien had always called uncle. Damien remained motionless long after Abigail finished reading the signature. Memories he had buried years ago resurfaced one after another. Vincent Moretti had taught him how to negotiate with dignity, how to remain calm under pressure, and how loyalty mattered more than fear. The man had become the closest thing Damien ever had to a father. Yet the careful chain of clues, the anonymous messages, Sophia's confession, and Daniel Mercer's disappearance all pointed toward the same impossible truth. Abigail gently placed the letter back on the desk. Maybe someone copied his handwriting. Damien slowly shook his head. Nobody could imitate it this perfectly. His voice carried disappointment rather than anger. He always believed power should stay inside the family. I believed respect had to be earned. Abigail stepped closer without speaking. She simply rested her hand lightly against his arm. The quiet gesture steadied him more than any speech could have. Several hours later, Damien requested a private meeting with Vincent at the family's historic vineyard north of the city, a place where generations of Morettis had celebrated weddings, birthdays, and harvest festivals. The rows of grapevines stretched beneath a bright afternoon sky, peaceful enough to hide decades of complicated history. Vincent arrived alone, dressed in a simple gray suit and carrying his favorite walking cane. He smiled warmly when he saw Damien. You sounded serious. Damien placed the recovered engagement ring and the handwritten letter on a wooden table between them. Vincent looked at both objects before letting out a slow breath. So you finally reached this part of the story. Damien searched the older man's face. Tell me I am wrong. Vincent lowered himself into a chair with surprising calm. I wanted to protect everything your parents built. By threatening innocent people? Damien asked quietly. Vincent closed his eyes for a brief moment. Never threatening. Guiding. Pressure creates obedience. Obedience protects empires. Abigail listened from several feet away, hidden only by respect rather than secrecy. She finally understood that Vincent truly believed every decision had been necessary. He was not driven by cruelty. He was driven by fear of losing control. Damien reached into his briefcase and removed a thick folder. Daniel Mercer collected financial records linking several shell companies to fraudulent investments. After he disappeared, Those records never reached the authorities. Vincent's expression changed for the first time. Where did you find them? Damien answered softly. I did not. Abigail looked toward him in surprise. Damien continued without looking away from Vincent. Abigail remembered one more detail this morning. Daniel trusted her because she stayed beside him when everyone else walked away. Before the ambulance arrived, he quietly told her the briefcase would eventually reach the only person he believed could end this without destroying innocent lives. Abigail reached into her canvas tote bag and carefully removed an ordinary children's picture book she had carried since volunteering at the library. Tucked inside the back cover was a thin, waterproof envelope she had discovered only that morning after the fading memory finally returned. Daniel had slipped it there while thanking her for staying with him. She had forgotten the moment completely until now. Damien placed the sealed envelope beside the ring. Vincent stared at it in stunned silence. You were giving that to me? He asked. Damien answered with quiet certainty. No, I am giving you one final chance to do the right thing before anyone else opens it. Vincent looked at the envelope, then at Abigail, whose calm expression held neither hatred nor triumph, only compassion. For the first time in decades, the powerful man lowered his head. After a long silence, he whispered 7 words that nobody expected to hear. I am tired of protecting my mistakes. Several months later, the headlines that had once chased rumors finally reported facts. Federal investigators confirmed that financial records voluntarily surrendered by Vincent Moretti had uncovered years of fraudulent investments hidden behind layers of shell companies. The legal process moved carefully through the courts, and because Vincent cooperated fully, countless employees and innocent families were protected from unnecessary hardship, while those responsible for orchestrating the deception faced justice under the law. Newspapers called it one of the most surprising corporate reform stories in New York history. Damien never attended a single television interview. Instead, he quietly resigned from every organization connected to the old empire and began transforming Moretti Holdings into a transparent investment company focused on community projects, scholarships, and neighborhood businesses. Many people questioned his decision to walk away from the influence his family had spent generations building. Damien never argued with them. He simply kept working. Abigail returned to the ordinary neighborhood she had always loved, except nothing felt quite ordinary anymore. With help from her father and a modest investment that Damien insisted was a business partnership rather than a gift, she opened a warm little bakery on a peaceful corner where the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls drifted onto the sidewalk every morning. Children from the nearby elementary school stopped in after class for cookies. Elderly couples shared coffee by the front window. Abigail still dropped measuring spoons, still forgot where she left her apron, and still laughed first whenever a cake came out looking slightly crooked. Somehow those little imperfections became the bakery's greatest charm. Above the register hung a handwritten sign that read, "Perfect is overrated. Kindness is homemade." One quiet Saturday afternoon, her father looked toward the front door and smiled without saying a word. Abigail glanced up from the counter just as the familiar chime announced another customer. Damien stepped inside wearing blue jeans, a dark jacket, and no security team. For the first time since she had met him, he looked like a man carrying no invisible weight on his shoulders. He studied the display case with exaggerated seriousness before pointing toward a chocolate chip cookie that looked slightly lopsided. I heard the baker here makes cookies that taste better than they look. Abigail laughed immediately. Someone has been spreading suspiciously accurate information. He accepted the cookie, took one bite, and nodded with quiet satisfaction. Still true. They stood smiling at one another while the afternoon sun filled the bakery with golden light. Damien reached into his jacket pocket and carefully placed a small velvet box on the counter. Abigail looked at it before meeting his eyes. Please tell me nobody is about to trip over another ribbon. He laughed. A full, genuine laugh that would have surprised anyone who had known him a year earlier. I checked the floor twice. She slowly opened the box. Inside rested the same diamond ring that had accidentally changed both of their lives. Damien gently took her hand. The first time fate made the choice before either of us understood it. This time I am asking because there is nobody else I could ever imagine building a home with. Abigail Carter, will you marry me? Tears gathered in her eyes. But her smile remained bright enough to answer before any words arrived. She nodded once, then whispered, yes. This time it is exactly the right woman. Damien slipped the ring onto her finger, and this time it fit with effortless certainty. Customers inside the bakery noticed what had happened and quietly applauded. Abigail's father wiped his eyes while pretending to rearrange coffee mugs. Outside, children laughed as they chased one another down the sidewalk, completely unaware that the most important victory had never been about power, wealth, or family names. It had been about two ordinary hearts choosing trust over fear, compassion over control, and hope over the mistakes of the past. As Damien and Abigail stepped outside together, hand in hand, the evening breeze carried the sweet scent of fresh bread through the neighborhood, and for the first time in many years, the future waiting ahead of them felt wonderfully ordinary. Sometimes destiny arrives with perfect timing. Sometimes it arrives by beautiful accident. What matters most is having the courage to recognize the right person when life gives you a second chance.